Some things start as a whisper, quiet, almost insignificant, just background noise you do not pay much attention to. But sometimes that whisper turns into something loud, something impossible to ignore. And that night, it came from my best friend, Mark. By the time it was over, my entire world had shifted. It was a Friday evening, the kind of night that felt too still, too normal. The kind of night that should have been like any other. I had just cracked open a cold beer, letting the familiar burn settle in my chest, when my phone buzzed. It was Mark. We had been friends since college, thick as thieves, the kind of bond where no words were needed to know something was wrong. And the second I answered, I knew this was not just a casual check-in. "You sitting down, man?" His voice was low, serious. I frowned, setting the beer down. "What is it?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "I did not know if I should tell you this, but I figured you would rather hear it from me." That uneasy feeling settled deep in my gut. "Tell me what?" "I heard something. About Rachel." My wife's name felt like a slap to the face. My grip on the bottle tightened. "From who?" My voice came out steady, but inside, something cold crawled through my veins. Mark hesitated. "Some guys from church." That made no sense. Rachel had been spending more time at the church over the past year, volunteering, attending Bible studies, even meeting with the priest, Father James, for guidance. I never questioned it. I figured it was her way of finding balance, maybe peace. She had always been the more spiritual one. But now, Mark's tone sent a different kind of message. "What exactly did you hear?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "They say she has been meeting privately with Father James. More than usual." A cold, sharp silence stretched between us. I ran a hand over my face. "You sure about this?" "I would not call you if I wasn't," Mark said. "Look, I do not know if it is true, but I thought you should know." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "Yeah, thanks for telling me." I ended the call and sat there, staring at the blank TV screen. My head spun with everything I had overlooked, the late nights, the quick swipes on her phone when I entered the room, the distance that had slowly crept between us. Had I been blind? I needed answers, and I was not about to sit around waiting for them. Rachel was still at the church. I checked her planner, something I had not done in a long time. Right there, staring back at me, was tonight's schedule, Friday evening confession, Father James. I did not hesitate. I grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and drove toward the church. My hands were tight around the wheel, knuckles white as streetlights blurred past. Every moment replayed in my head. Our life together, the way she used to look at me, the woman I thought I knew. And now, I was about to find out if I'd been living a lie. The church parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few cars. I recognized one immediately. Rachel's blue sedan, parked neatly under the dim glow of the street lamp. I killed the engine and sat there, waiting. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, my mind racing. I did not know what I was about to walk into, but I had to know. I stepped out, shoving my hands into my jacket pockets, more to stop them from shaking than to keep warm. The church doors were unlocked, always open for late-night confessions. The dim glow of candlelight flickered along the stone walls, casting long shadows. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. Then I saw it. A faint light seeped from under a door in the corner, the confessional. I moved closer, my footsteps barely making a sound on the polished floor. I could hear voices now. Rachel's, soft, familiar. His calm, steady. I pressed my back against the wall, just outside the door, straining to hear. "It is complicated." Rachel's voice came through, barely above a whisper. I did not know what to do. A pause. Then Father James spoke, his voice smooth, reassuring. "You do not have to worry. He does not need to know." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I felt my pulse in my throat, my breathing shallow. I had walked into this church searching for answers, and now I was terrified of what I had just found. "We will handle this." I stepped back from the door, my chest tightening, my breath coming in heavy bursts. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I had come here hoping, maybe even praying, that what I had heard was just a misunderstanding. But that sentence, that whisper through the confessional door, that told me everything I needed to know. I turned and walked quickly back down the aisle, pushing through the heavy wooden church doors and into the cold night air. The chill hit me like a slap, but I barely felt it. My head was spinning, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I needed time to think. I needed space. Most of all, I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I got into my car and just sat there, staring out the windshield at the stained glass windows glowing in the darkness. The very place I had once thought of as sacred now felt tainted, like a crime scene. My wife, had been in there, sharing secrets with another man. And not just any man, a priest. A man who was supposed to be a moral guide, a figure of trust and purity. My jaw tightened, so hard it ached. I had spent years building a life with Rachel, believing we had something strong. But now I did not know what was real anymore. The drive home was quiet. No music, no radio, just the sound of my own thoughts swirling around like a storm that would not settle. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my anger had only grown heavier. I had come looking for the truth, and now that I had it, I had no idea what to do with it. An hour passed, maybe two. I lost track of time, sitting in the darkened living room, waiting for her. The silence in the house felt suffocating. I kept replaying everything in my mind. The way her voice had sounded, the secrecy in their words, the way she had feared me finding out. That was the part that burned the most. Finally, headlights flashed through the window. I stood up, watching from the shadows as Rachel pulled into the driveway. She sat in the car for a moment, looking at her phone. Then she got out, adjusting her coat against the cold. She did not look guilty, not even a little bit. She walked up the steps, unlocked the door, and stepped inside, her face lighting up with that same warm smile she had given me for years. "Hey," she said casually, hanging her coat on the rack. I did not answer. Her smile faltered as she turned toward me. "What is wrong?" I studied her, taking in every detail, the way she stood, the way she looked at me. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted with everything. She looked like a stranger now. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice steady. She frowned, like the question confused her. "At the church," she said, not missing a beat. "What?" I took a slow step closer. "What were you doing there?" She let out a small chuckle, but it sounded forced. "Confession, like always. You know that." I stared at her. Confession. That was the excuse. After everything I had just heard, after what I knew now, confession, I repeated. "So, tell me, Rachel, what sins have you been carrying around that requires so many private meetings with Father James?" Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time, I saw it, that flicker of hesitation, that brief moment where she tried to decide how to play this. "Nothing major," she said quickly. "Just everyday stuff. Stress, doubts, life." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "Must be a lot of doubts. You have been spending more time at that church than you spend at home." She sighed, the patience in her expression thinning. "I go there to clear my head, okay? You know how much my faith means to me. Why are you suddenly acting like this is a problem?" I studied her carefully, looking for cracks in the mask she had perfected. Most nights, I probably would have let this go, just like I had all the other times she had brushed me off. But not tonight. "I talked to Mark," I said, keeping my tone casual. Her eyes flicked toward me, just a fraction of a second too fast. "Mark?" she repeated, trying to sound confused. "Yeah," I said, nodding slowly. "He heard some things. Things about you and Father James." Her reaction was instant. A small twitch at the corner of her mouth. Barely noticeable, but I caught it. It was like watching a poker player realize too late that they had been caught in a bluff. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, so now we're taking Mark's word as gospel?" I shrugged. "He's my best friend. And unlike you, he has no reason to lie to me." Her expression tightened, just for a second, before she masked it again. "So what, exactly, did he tell you?" I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch between us. "He said people have noticed things. Whispers about private meetings. About how close you and the good Father have gotten." She crossed her arms, mirroring my stance. "Let me guess," she said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "Now you are going to accuse me of having an affair with a priest? Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds?" It did sound ridiculous, and that was what made it so much worse. "I do not care how it sounds," I said, my voice rising slightly. I care about what is real. And what is real, Rachel, is that you are lying to me. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I'm not lying. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Not because I found this funny, but because I knew she was lying and she was still bold enough to stand there and deny it. You are really going to sit here and tell me those meetings are innocent? Yes, she said, holding my gaze. They are. I go there to confess, to talk about things I cannot talk about with anyone else. That is it. She was good. I had to give her that. Her voice was steady, her expression controlled, but there was something too perfect about the way she said it, like she had practiced it in her head before walking through that door. And that was the moment I knew. This was not just a misunderstanding. This was not paranoia or insecurity. This was a lie, and she was looking me dead in the eye while she told it. She had deleted everything. That realization settled over me like a thick, suffocating fog. No one wipes out an entire conversation unless they have something to hide. And Rachel, my wife, the woman I had trusted for years, had something to hide. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around the phone as I stared at the blank screen. This was not paranoia. This was not me reading too much into things. She had deliberately erased her messages with him. And if she had nothing to hide, why go through the trouble? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My pulse was hammering in my ears, and my thoughts were running a mile a minute. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. Opening my laptop again, I went deeper. I checked our phone records, scrolling through the list of numbers, searching for anything out of place. My hand shook slightly as I scanned the call logs. There it was, his number. Dozens of calls. Some late at night. Others in the middle of the day, when I was at work, and she had the house to herself. My stomach turned. I kept digging. Her calendar was synced to our shared email, and I scrolled back through the past few months. Late night volunteer work, extra church meetings, confessions outside of normal hours. All of it lined up. A pattern. I exhaled sharply and ran a hand over my face. I was staring at the truth, but somehow I still was not ready to accept it. Rachel was lying. She was lying to my face over and over and expecting me to just take it. I closed the laptop and stood up, pacing the kitchen. The clock on the wall read 4:17 a.m., but I was wide awake. My body buzzed with a mix of adrenaline and fury. Sleep was out of the question. I needed to talk to her. But not now. No. If I confronted her with nothing but accusations, she would just lie again. She would twist things, turn them around, and make herself the victim. No, I had to be smarter than that. I had to catch her in the act. The next day, Rachel acted like nothing was wrong. She came downstairs around 8, dressed in her usual weekend sweater and leggings, looking relaxed, as if she had not spent the night hiding secrets. "Morning," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I watched her from across the kitchen, studying every movement, every glance, every pause. She had no idea what I knew. "Morning," I replied, forcing my voice to sound normal. She sat at the table, scrolling through her phone like it was just another day. I took a sip of my own coffee and leaned against the counter. "You have plans today?" She hesitated just for a second. "Not really," she said, not looking up. "Just some errands." Liar. I nodded, acting uninterested. "I might be out for a while, too." She glanced up briefly, maybe trying to read me, but I kept my expression neutral. "Okay," she said casually. I finished my coffee and set the mug in the sink. "Let me know if you need anything." Then I walked upstairs, grabbed my jacket and keys, and left the house. But I did not go far. I parked a few streets away and waited. If I was wrong, if I was just some jealous, paranoid husband, then she would go about her day, run errands, come home, and I would look like an idiot. But if I was right, I would know for sure. I did not have to wait long. An hour later, Rachel left the house. She drove right past me, completely unaware that I was sitting there, watching. I followed from a distance, careful not to get too close. She drove to the church. Of course she did. She pulled into the parking lot, parked in the same spot she always did, and got out of the car. I watched as she walked up the steps, hesitated for a moment, checking her phone, then pushed open the doors and went inside. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. She was meeting him again. I waited a few minutes before stepping out of my car. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way toward the church, my footsteps slow and deliberate. The entrance was unlocked, just like the night before. Inside, the place was quiet. Too quiet. I moved through the aisles, keeping close to the shadows. The confessional booth was empty this time, but down the hall, a light shone from Father James' office. I moved closer, my breath steady, my hands clenched at my sides. Then I heard them. Their voices were low, almost whispering. Rachel's voice was soft, uncertain. I do not know how much longer I can keep this up. He is starting to ask too many questions. Father James' response was calm, reassuring. It is going to be fine. Just stay calm, and do not give him a reason to doubt you. A cold wave of anger washed over me. She was covering her tracks. She was working with him to keep me in the dark. I had heard enough. I stepped forward and knocked loud. The conversation inside stopped abruptly. A pause, then slow, hesitant footsteps. The door creaked open, and there he was. Father James. His face was calm, composed, but I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Ethan," he said smoothly, like I was just another visitor. "This is unexpected." I crossed my arms. "Yeah, I bet it is." Rachel appeared behind him, her face pale. She looked at me, then at him, then back to me. She knew. She knew she had been caught. For a moment, none of us spoke. The weight of everything that had been hidden was now out in the open. I exhaled slowly, my jaw tight. "Are you going to invite me in?" Father James hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course." I walked in, my heart pounding, my mind already set. It was time for the truth. No more lies. No more secrets. And if they thought they could talk their way out of this, they were dead wrong. She regretted it? I stared at her, unblinking, trying to process what she had just admitted. A single kiss. That was all she was willing to confess to. But I had learned enough about lies to know that the first version of a confession is rarely the whole truth. It is just the version they think you can handle. I inhaled slowly through my nose, letting the silence stretch, letting her squirm. "A kiss," I repeated flatly. Her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes red and swollen. I swear it was a mistake. It was one moment of weakness, and I stopped it. I told them it could not happen again. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. "And yet here we are, sitting at this table while you lie to my face." "I'm not lying," she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. I exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table so I would not slam my fist into it. My patience was running on fumes. "Laura, I know about the messages. The ones you deleted. The ones telling him you were afraid of me finding out. So do me a favor, drop the innocent act." She looked away, her breath hitching. She knew she was caught, and she was scrambling for a way out. I had seen it before in 100 different ways. I shook my head. "You think I'm stupid?" She flinched at the harshness in my voice. "No." "Then stop insulting me with half-truths." "How long, Laura? How long has this been going on?" She squeezed her eyes shut, gripping her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "A few months. A few months." I let out a slow breath. "And you expect me to believe it never went further than a kiss?" Her silence told me everything. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. I paced across the kitchen, running a hand through my hair, trying to keep my temper in check. "You do not get to keep the details to yourself," I said, my voice low and sharp. "Not anymore. If there is anything left of this marriage, you owe me the truth." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I was beyond caring. "I told you the truth," she choked out. "No, you told me a version of the truth," I shot back. "The kind that makes you look less guilty. But I am done playing games, Laura." She shook her head rapidly, wiping at her face with trembling hands. "I know how it looks, but I swear to you, it was just emotions getting messy. I was lost. I was looking for comfort, and I made a mistake. A stupid, horrible mistake." I let her words hang in the air. Then I turned back to her, my expression unreadable. "Did you love him?" Her face crumpled like I had hit her. The silence stretched. I clenched my jaw. "Answer me." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she shook her head. "No." I watched her carefully, searching for the lie. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But trust is not something you can just glue back together. You were planning to leave me, weren't you? I asked. She gasped like I had struck her. No, I never. Then why were you hiding this? Why were you sneaking around like some teenager afraid of getting caught? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I would have fought for you, Laura, but you never even gave me the chance. Her face twisted in anguish. I thought if I told you, you would hate me. I laughed bitterly. And lying to me was better? She shook her head, sobbing quietly, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no sadness, just a cold, numbing emptiness. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the folder of screenshots I had taken. You see this? I said, holding the screen up to her face. This is not just one mistake. This is months of lying, sneaking, planning. This is not a moment of weakness, Laura. This is betrayal. Her shoulders shook as she covered her face with her hands. I am so sorry, she whispered. I clenched my teeth. I was sick of hearing those words. Sorry did not erase the nights I spent believing in a marriage that no longer existed. Sorry did not take back the way she made me feel like a fool. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. I need space. Her head snapped up. Please, Ethan. I'm not leaving right now. I interrupted, my voice firm. But I need time to think, and I do not want to see you. Do you understand me? Her lip trembled. She nodded. I turned and walked toward the stairs. My legs felt heavy, my body exhausted from the weight of what I had just uncovered. As I reached the hallway, she called out after me, her voice broken. Do you still love me? I froze. For the first time, I did not have an answer. I left her there, alone in the kitchen, drowning in her regrets. And for the first time in our marriage, I did not care. I stared at the picture, my pulse pounding in my ears. Laura stood next to Father Michael, their shoulders nearly touching. It was subtle, too subtle for someone who did not know what to look for. But I knew. I knew the way my wife's body language had changed around me in the past few months. And I knew that this was the posture of two people who had something to hide. I zoomed in, scanning every detail. The way she leaned just slightly toward him. The way his hand hovered too close to her lower back. The way their smiles weren't just friendly, but familiar. I exhaled slowly. So, the religious retreat wasn't just about faith. It was about them. I clenched my jaw, closing out the pictures before I did something stupid, like throw my phone across the room. My fingers twitched with the need to act, to confront, to demand the truth, to make them both feel the kind of betrayal they had shoved onto me. But I forced myself to stay still. I was not going to lose control. Not yet. Instead, I did what I should have done earlier. I started digging deeper. I searched her name alongside Father Michael's, looking for any mention of them together. Church bulletins, event schedules, old newsletters. And then I found it. A list of church volunteers who had attended the retreat. Their names were listed side by side, along with a note that certain volunteers had been assigned one-on-one spiritual mentorship sessions. I almost laughed at the irony. Mentorship, right? A few more clicks, and I found a church contact number. My fingers hovered over the call button. What was I even expecting? That someone from the church would just confirm my suspicions? That they would tell me outright that my wife had been sneaking around under the guise of faith? No. If I wanted real proof, I needed to go to the source. I pushed away from the desk and grabbed my jacket. 30 minutes later, the church. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived. It was late, too late for services, but I knew from experience that Father Michael often stayed late. Whether it was paperwork, confessions, or something else entirely. Well, that was what I was here to find out. I stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked toward the entrance. The heavy wooden doors were unlocked, just like they had been the night before. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing against the stone floors. The scent of incense still lingered in the air, mingling with the faint mustiness of old books and candle wax. The church was quiet, dimly lit except for the soft glow of candles near the altar. And then I saw him. Father Michael was at the front of the church, adjusting something near the altar. He had not noticed me yet, his focus elsewhere. I took a slow, steady breath and walked forward. He turned at the sound of my footsteps, his expression shifting from calm to cautious the moment he saw me. "Ethan," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. the kind of voice meant to put people at ease. "This is a surprise." I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms over my chest. "Is it?" His gaze flickered for just a second. "I suppose not," he admitted. "Something tells me this isn't a friendly visit." I scoffed. "You could say that." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and held it up so he could see the screenshot of their messages. "Tell me," I said, my voice controlled but firm, "why a priest is sending private messages to my wife about keeping secrets from me." His jaw tightened, but he kept his expression calm. Too calm. "Ethan, I understand you were upset, but—" I took a step forward, lowering my voice. "Do not patronize me." A flicker of something passed across his face. "I have seen the messages," I continued. "I have seen the photos. I know about the retreat. So, let's skip the part where you try to play innocent, and you tell me exactly what the hell is going on between you and my wife." He sighed. Rubbing the bridge of his nose like this was an inconvenience to him. "There is nothing inappropriate happening," he said, meeting my gaze. "Laura came to me because she was struggling. She needed someone to talk to. Someone who could guide her." "Guide her," I repeated. "Is that what you call it?" "Yes," he said simply. I clenched my fists. Then why hide it? Why delete messages? Why make her afraid of me finding out? His lips pressed into a thin line. "Because she was afraid of how you would react." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, that is rich. She wasn't afraid of me, Father. She was afraid of getting caught." I watched him carefully, waiting for him to slip up, to reveal even a fraction of the guilt I knew was there. But he just shook his head. "You're looking for something that isn't there, Ethan." I stared at him for a long moment, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Then, I put my phone away and took another step forward, lowering my voice. "I know men like you," I said. "Men who hide behind faith, who manipulate people into believing they are something they are not." His expression remained unreadable. "I'm sorry you feel that way." I tilted my head slightly. "You do not deny it, though." His eyes darkened just a fraction. "There is nothing to deny." I held his gaze for a few more seconds before exhaling sharply. "Fine," I said. "I will find the truth myself." With that, I turned and walked out of the church, my pulse still hammering as I stepped into the cold night air. Back at home. By the time I got home, Laura was still sitting in the kitchen, staring at her untouched cup of coffee. She looked up the second I walked in. "Where were you?" I shrugged off my jacket, setting my phone on the counter. "I had a chat with Father Michael." Her breath hitched. "Ethan." I held up a hand. "Save it." She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "What did he say?" I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. Exactly what I expected him to. Tears welled up her eyes. "Please, Ethan. I told you the truth." "No," I said, my voice cold. "You told me a version of it, and I am done listening to versions." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the pictures from the retreat, then placed it in front of her. "Explain this." Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the phone. I crossed my arms, waiting. She stared at the photo for a long time. Then, slowly, she set the phone down and wiped at her face. Her next words came out so soft, I barely heard them. "I think I made a terrible mistake." I let out a slow, measured breath. "For once," I said, "we finally agree on something." I didn't respond. I just stared at the words, my grip tightening around the phone like it might shatter in my hands. "We need to talk." "No, we didn't. Talking was what got us here." Lies wrapped in pretty words. Half-truths twisted into something she could justify. I set the phone down and pushed my coffee away. It had gone cold, but that wasn't why I suddenly had no appetite. I needed to clear my head. I needed answers. Pulling out my wallet, I threw a few bills onto the table and stood up. The waitress barely glanced at me as I walked out, and I was grateful for it. The last thing I needed was pity from a stranger. The drive back into town was long, the roads empty except for the occasional car passing by. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my thoughts racing. She doesn't know if it's mine. The words gnawed at me, clawing their way under my skin. I had spent years building a life with Laura, believing in a marriage I thought was solid, even if it wasn't perfect. But now, everything felt like a lie. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my stomach was twisted into knots. The house looked the same as it always had, but now it felt different, like a stranger's home. Laura was waiting in the living room, her hands gripping a mug of tea she probably wasn't even drinking. She looked up the second I walked in, her eyes puffy from crying. "You came back," she whispered. I shut the door behind me, my movements slow and deliberate. I needed time to think. She nodded, setting the mug down with shaking hands. "Understand." I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. "No, Laura, you don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't have lied to me for months. You wouldn't have let this get this far." She wiped at her eyes, but I didn't care about the tears anymore. They didn't mean anything. "Do you even love me?" I asked, my voice quieter now. Or was this just about filling some void? She sucked in a sharp breath. "Of course I love you. I never stop." I scoffed. "You have a hell of a way of showing it." The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I exhaled slowly, rubbing my temples. "We need to get one thing straight before we go any further. I'm going to demand a paternity test." Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue. But she didn't. She just nodded, her face pale. "I expected that." "Good," I said. "Because there is no way in hell I am taking responsibility for a child that might not even be mine." She flinched at my words, but I refused to soften them. I wasn't in the business of sparing her feelings anymore. "I swear to you, Ethan," she whispered. "I didn't sleep with him. I told you the truth." I shook my head, letting out a slow breath. "You told me a version of the truth, Laura. And right now, I don't trust anything that comes out of your mouth." She closed her eyes for a long moment before looking back at me, something desperate in her gaze. "Do you think we can ever fix this?" I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know. I had spent the past 24 hours swinging between fury and heartbreak, between wanting to leave and wanting to fight. But the reality was, even if the baby was mine, that didn't erase what she had done. I sat down in the chair across from her, studying her like I was seeing her for the first time. "I don't know, Laura," I admitted, "and I'm not going to make any promises." Tears welled in her eyes again, but I wasn't moved by them. This was the mess she created, and she was finally realizing there might not be a way to clean it up. "We'll get the test done," I said. "After that, I'll decide what happens next." She nodded, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the table. "Okay." But deep down, I already knew, even if that child was mine, nothing between us would ever be the same again. Father Michael's eyes widened as he took me in, my clenched fists, the tension rolling off me like a thunderstorm ready to strike. He set his pen down carefully, like he was dealing with a wild animal. Maybe he was. "Ethan," he said, his voice even too composed for my liking. "What brings you here so late?" I let out a sharp breath through my nose, stepping deeper into the office. "You already know why I'm here." His fingers twitched slightly before he folded his hands on the desk. "I'm afraid I do not." "Liar." I shut the door behind me, the sound echoing through the small office. "I know about you and Laura." The words felt like poison on my tongue, and I spat them out like venom. "I know what you've been doing behind my back, and I know there's a baby that might not be mine." For the first time, his carefully crafted expression faltered. A flicker of something crossed his face. Fear? Guilt? It was gone too fast to tell. "Ethan," he started, his voice dipping into that same calm, measured tone he probably used during confession. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah? Then help me understand, Father." I leaned forward, planting my hands on the desk. He didn't move, but I could see the way his throat bobbed as he swallowed. "You were supposed to be a man of God," I said, my voice low, dangerous. "A man people trust. And instead, you spent months sneaking around with my wife. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I never meant to hurt anyone," he said, his voice softer now. "I was trying to help her." I slammed my hand down on the desk, making a stack of papers flutter. "Help her?" I scoffed. "You don't help someone by kissing them. You don't help someone by putting them in a position where they don't know if their own husband is the father of their child." His eyes flickered to the side, guilt. There it was. I had him. "You were supposed to guide her." I continued, my voice shaking with rage. "Instead, you took advantage of her when she was vulnerable." "That is not what happened," he said quickly, finally standing up. He was shorter than me, slighter, but he straightened his shoulders like he thought he could match my anger. Laura and we had an emotional connection, yes, but I never coerced her. Do not. I cut him off, my fist clenching. Try to make this her fault. She's responsible for her choices, but so are you. You knew she was married. You knew what you were doing. His face twisted like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I regret what happened. I let out another humorless laugh. Oh, you regret it now? I took a step closer, lowering my voice to a near whisper. Because I promise you, Michael, if that baby turns out to be yours, regret is going to be the least of your worries. His jaw tightened, his gaze finally meeting mine head-on. What do you want, Ethan? That was the real question, wasn't it? What did I want? I wanted to hit him. I wanted to tear this whole damn place apart. I wanted to erase the last few months, go back to the days when I still believed in my wife, in my marriage. But none of that was possible. Instead, I forced myself to take a step back. A paternity test is happening, I said. And if this kid is yours, you are going to be held accountable. Not just by me, but by your church, your community, by everyone. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Fear. I smirked. That's right. You think this is just between the three of us? You think you can handle a scandal like this and come out clean? Because let me tell you something. Father, there is nothing holier than the truth. And when it comes out, you're done. His hands curled into fists at his sides, but he didn't say a word. I turned and headed for the door, pausing just long enough to glance over my shoulder. Enjoy the time you have left in this church, Michael, because it won't be long before everyone sees you for exactly what you are. And with that, I walked out. Part 8. The night air hit me like a slap to the face, but I barely felt it. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My pulse was pounding, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. He was scared. Good. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt these past few months. Cornered, betrayed, powerless. But I wasn't powerless anymore. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, my headlights cutting through the darkness. I didn't know what my next move was yet. Part of me wanted to drive back home, demand more answers from Laura, make her feel the weight of this mess the same way I did. But another part of me, the part that still stupidly loved her, knew that I wasn't ready to see her yet. So instead, I drove. For hours, I let the road blur beneath me, my thoughts a tangled mess. I replayed every conversation, every lie, every red flag I had ignored. The way Laura had slowly drifted away, the nights she came home late, the guarded way she spoke when I asked about the church. How had I not seen it sooner? I pulled into an empty parking lot, killing the engine. The silence inside the car was deafening, but I welcomed it. I needed a moment to breathe, to process. Then my phone buzzed again. Laura. I hesitated before picking it up, staring at the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but I knew I couldn't run from this forever. I answered, bringing the phone my ear. What? She sniffled, her voice small. Where are you? Why does it matter? I leaned my head against the headrest, exhaustion creeping in. What do you want, Laura? She hesitated, then sighed. I need to know if you're coming home. Home. The word felt foreign now. That house wasn't home anymore. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. I do not know, I admitted. A long silence stretched between us before she finally spoke. I'll do whatever it takes, Ethan. I swear. I'll fix this. I let out a bitter laugh. Fix it, I repeated. Laura, you can't fix this. You can't undo what's been done. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just let out a quiet, I know. I rubbed my hand over my face, exhaustion settling deep in my bones. We'll take the test, I said. And after that, we'll see. Okay, she whispered. I hung up. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and endless. I didn't know where it led, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The church doors swung shut behind me, and I stood there for a moment, fists clenched at my sides, breathing hard. The night was cool, but my blood was boiling too hot to feel it. The confrontation with Father Michael hadn't given me the satisfaction I wanted. He admitted to what he'd done, sure, but there was no real remorse in his voice, just a calculated calm, a man trying to salvage his own skin while dressing his sins in pretty words. I walked to my car, my footsteps heavy against the gravel lot. Sliding into the driver's seat, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to hit something, someone, but I knew that wouldn't solve a damn thing. No punch, no shove, no broken nose could undo what had already been done. Laura, the baby, the wreckage of my marriage. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. I wasn't going back home tonight. Not yet. I needed space, time to think before I saw her again. I turned the key in the ignition and pulled out of the lot, the tires crunching against the loose gravel. The headlights cut through the darkness as I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, my mind circling the same thoughts over and over again. What if the baby is his? That question gnawed at me like a disease, sinking its teeth deeper into my chest with every passing second. If it was his, then what? Could I ever look at Laura again without seeing his shadow hanging over us? Could I live in a house where a child, his child, was growing up under my roof? No. If the baby wasn't mine, that was it. That was the final nail in the coffin. I wouldn't be the man who raised another man's child because of my wife's betrayal. And yet, the sick part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, was clinging to hope. Hope that it was mine. Hope that, somehow, some way, we could find a way back from this. I pulled into a gas station, parking in one of the farthest spots, letting the engine idle as I stared blankly at the neon glow of the convenience store sign. I reached for my phone and saw the missed text from Laura, the unread messages stacking up like bricks on my chest. Laura, please talk to me, Doc. Laura, I don't know how to fix this, but I need you, Doc. Laura, I understand if you hate me, but I still love you. I let out a bitter laugh, rubbing a hand down my face. Love? What the hell did love even mean anymore? It sure as hell hadn't stopped her from sneaking around. It hadn't stopped her from ruining everything we'd built. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes for a long moment, just breathing. I could drive away. Right now, I could hit the highway and disappear. Leave her with the mess she created and never look back. But I knew I wouldn't. Not yet. There was still one thing left to do. The test. I put the car in drive and headed toward home, my stomach twisting with dread. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her voice or see the regret in her eyes. But this wasn't about her anymore. This was about me. About the truth. And no matter what it was, I was going to face it. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was still there. I sat in mine for a minute, staring at the house that had once been ours. Now, it felt foreign, like a place that belonged to someone else. I got out, walking up the steps with heavy footsteps. The door was unlocked, just like always. But nothing about this felt like home anymore. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender hitting me, a scent I used to love. Now it just made me sick. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and tired. When she saw me, she straightened, her eyes searching mine for something. A sign that I wasn't completely gone. "You came back," she whispered. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and leaned against the counter, keeping a safe distance. She stood up, hesitant. "I meant what I said," she said softly. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what to do." I let out a slow breath, my hands tightening around the bottle. She still didn't get it. "You don't get to decide how this plays out," I said, my voice level. "That choice was taken from you the moment you chose him." She flinched, nodding. "I know." I studied her, the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted. And despite everything, I still couldn't fully recognize her. She looked like Laura. She sounded like Laura. But the woman I knew wouldn't have done this. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the blanket. "What happens now?" I exhaled, setting the bottle down. "We take the test." She nodded. "Okay. And if it's not mine," I continued, "we're done. Completely. No second chances." Her breath hitched, and for a second, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not just regret, not just guilt, but terror. "Ethan," she whispered, "I don't want to lose you." I looked at her long and hard. "You already did." Her face crumpled, but I didn't offer comfort. I turned away and headed for the stairs, not sparing her another glance. This wasn't over. Not until I had the truth. And once I had it, I would finally know whether to stay and fight or walk away forever.